Hello, and welcome to Excel Weekend 9. Thanks to Cristiano and his team for inviting me to participate, and thank you for joining me. My name is Jon Peltier, and I will show you how to build a chart export feature in Excel VBA. I'm using this workbook, Excel Weekend VBA Chart Export.xlsm. You should have downloaded a copy so you can follow along. I've been an Excel MVP every year since 2001. My company is Peltier Technical Services, which I started 20 years ago when I became a full-time Excel developer. Visit my website at peltiertech.com. My blog has hundreds of tutorials about Excel, especially about Excel charting and Excel programming with VBA. You can also read about Peltier Tech's other products and services. Peltier Tech does training like this conference session. Peltier Tech works on custom Excel projects for clients, such as this export chart feature. Peltier Tech also produces Excel add-ins that help you create unique charts you didn't know Excel could create and work with charts and data much more efficiently. Here is my email address. If you have questions about this presentation or similar topics, contact me. Mention Excel Weekend and I'll be sure to reply quickly. My objective is to show you how to create a feature to export a chart using Excel VBA. I assume you already know at least a little about VBA, but I know you will learn more. It will also be instructive to watch a developer construct a robust feature, bit by bit, adding improvements and enhancements until the feature is ready for regular users. Here is a simple chart we will export again and again during this exercise. It's a simple column chart and it uses this simple set of data. What it shows isn't important, it's just what we will use to see if our routine is working. We will make use of the chart export method of VBA. You can read about the method at this URL listed here. It's part of the documentation Microsoft has posted for VBA in Excel. The syntax is expression.export with a few parameters. Expression just means any variable that represents a chart object. It could be active chart, or it could be a variable that is fully referenced by workbook, worksheet, chart object, and chart. The various arguments of this method are file name, which is the name of the exported file. It may or may not include the path, but if you omit the path of the active workbook will be used. Filter name is just the name of the graphic filter that's stored in the registry. It could be PNG, could be GIF, could be JPEG, bitmap, or SVG. I think also TIFF is supported, but I don't use TIFF. If you omit the filter name, the extension of the file name is used. And if you try to use a filter that doesn't exist, you will get a file, but it will be 0 bytes. There will be no contents to the file. The third argument of the export method is interactive, which supposedly shows a dialog box that contains details for you to select a filter and select a path, but as far as I know, it doesn't work. The dialog is never shown, but I will show you how to use a dialog so the user can select a file name and a location where to save their image file. So let's get started with VBA. VBA works with an editor that's a separate window from your workbook windows, but it's still part of Excel. It's very helpful to have the developer tab, which has some controls that help you work with VBA. The developer tab is not by default shown in Excel. If you don't see the developer tab, you can right click on the ribbon and select customize the ribbon. And when this comes up, this dialog, you see a list of main tabs on the right. Just check the box in front of developer and the developer tab will magically appear. To open up the VB IDE, which means Visual Basic Integrated Design Environment, it's a fancy name for the Visual Basic editor. Come over to the first button for Visual Basic and click it, or use the shortcut Alt F11. And here's the VB editor window. You see a bunch of menus and toolbars at the top. There's two panes on the side. The top one is the VB project pane, and the bottom one is the properties pane. And what you see in this case is I have a few workbooks open. Those are our add-ins, and then there's our Excel Weekend workbook here, and there's another file that's left over that I closed, but for some reason it still appears. And when I open up the Excel Weekend project, you see there's a folder with a bunch of Microsoft Excel objects, and these are just all the worksheets in the workbook, as well as an object for the workbook. For us to actually start writing code, what we have to do is insert a code module, and you can do that from the insert menu, insert module, or you can right click anywhere on any of the objects in the project and select insert and module. And what pops up is a little window where you can enter code. It has the name of the workbook first, and then it says module 1. Module 1 is the name of the module, and down in the properties pane you can actually change the name of that module if you want. And so I usually name them something like M, and I give it an underscore, and then I'll say export chart. This helps you find the module you're looking for instead of them all being labeled module 1, module 2, and so forth. So I'll hit enter, and you see the name of the module changes in the list of objects under the Excel Weekend project. You notice at the top it says option explicit. What option explicit means is when you use a variable, you have to first declare it or dim it explicitly. If you don't, then it will be a compile error. If you don't have option explicit, you can use a variable that you haven't declared yet, and that means that if you have been using a variable all along and then you misspell it once, you won't get a compile error. Excel will just think this is a new variable, and it will have an initial value of, say, 0 instead of the calculation that you were performing. So you want it to say option explicit. Unfortunately, by default, it won't say option explicit. If you don't see option explicit, type it there, and then come over to the tools menu and choose options, and you see a bunch of selections here. Make sure require variable declaration is checked. That will make option explicit show up at the top of every new module that you create. While you're at it, uncheck the auto syntax check box, because what that does is whenever you have a compile error, not only does it turn the code red where there's a compile error, but it pops up a dialog. So if you're in the middle of typing some stuff, you don't need that dialog to show you that there's a compile error. You can see the red text. So I find that to be very annoying, so I always uncheck that. And then say OK, and we're ready to go. I'm back in the Excel workbook right now, and the next several worksheets have bits of code in them. The code doesn't work in an Excel worksheet. I'm just storing it here. It's a convenient place to put it so that if you want, you can copy and paste it into the code module. So the first thing we're going to do is type this command, sub, and then a subroutine name, and I'm going to call it export active chart. And you hit enter, and if you haven't put the parentheses at the end, it adds the parentheses, and then it adds end sub and leaves a space in between. That won't do anything. There's no commands in there that do anything. So we're going to insert the activechart.export command, and then we'll have to tell VBA what to use for file name and filter name. So let's go to the VBA window, Alt F11, and let's see how this works. So I'm just going to type this in, sub, and I'm going to say export active chart. And I hit enter, and you see here's my stub of a routine. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the command activechart.export, and let's paste that in, and that looks great. Now remember what I told you about option explicit. If I haven't defined file name and filter name, this isn't going to work, because option explicit says I have to declare it first. And in fact, I'll show you what happens in that case. If I try to run this, and I can run the code by typing that, by clicking that VCR play button or pressing the F5 key. If I click that, I'll get an error, compile error, the variable not defined. Okay, so that's what it looks like when you haven't declared the variable. So let's just declare the variable. I'm going to, first of all, you can stop the code now by clicking the stop button, and it stops. And I'm going to put my file name right here. So I say dim, that's how you declare it. Dim file name is a string variable. And the file name, I'm just going to use the active workbook path. And I'm going to use the path separator, which is /, and I'm going to say mychart.png. And then I also need to declare filter name. So let me copy, I'm using a text file on the side so you don't have to watch me mistype various things here. And so let's paste that here. I'm declaring filter name again as a string, and the filter name is going to be PNG. And now this should work. So let's see what happens when I run this code now. I'm going to just click somewhere in there, and I'm going to press the F5 key, and it's going to try to run, and I get an error, runtime error, object variable or with block variable not set. And I'll click, and I mean, what does that mean? Well, in my case, what it means is I don't have an active chart. So what I have to do is, let's stop this. Let's go back to Excel, and I'll slip over to the chart to export sheet. I'll click on the chart so it's an active chart. And now I want to run that macro. I could go back to the VB editor and do it, but I can also do it from here. So if I go up to the developer tab and click on macros, this lists all the macros in the active workbook, actually in all open workbooks, but this is the only one with any macros in it. And it says export active chart. All right, so let's run it. Let's see what happens. Well, first of all, let me pop up the folder that this workbook is in. You see the XLSM file, and then you see the temp file that Microsoft always makes for an Excel workbook. There's no other files here. And what I'm going to do is run the code from the macro window. And I'll say run. And there's my file, mychart.png, just what I told it. And it's in this folder, which is just what it said it was going to do. And so, and I double click on that, it's going to open up in my image editor. I use Irfan View, and here's, look at that, there's my image of a chart. So we're done, the feature's done, isn't it? Well, no, it's not done yet. We can refine it. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to show you some other things that happen here. I'm going to go back Alt F11 to the VB editor, and here we are. If I want to step through the code and not necessarily just run it from beginning to end, instead of the F5 key, I can use the F8 key, or I can come up to the debug screen and use step into. You see step into is F8. That just means go to the next step. So I'll do F8, and you can see what it's doing. So now it tells me what my file name should be. If I put my mouse over a variable, it tells me what the value of that variable is. And it's nothing yet because I haven't executed this statement. I can see what the active workbook path is, and it's C:\\/ Excel weekend 9, and then I add this, and then mychart.png. So I click F8 to execute that, and file name is, now that's the whole file name I'm going to use, and then filter name is nothing yet until I execute it with F8. Now filter name is PNG. That's cool. So now I can come down here and I can see file name, filter name, and I'm just going to say F8, and away we go. And at any point I can do F5, and it'll just run all the way to the end of the program. Now that was a simple routine, and I said it's not done yet. You remember what happened when I ran the code and there was no chart selected? I got an error. Well, we can fix that right here. Here's a little clause I can insert into my subroutine, and what it'll do is, if there's no active chart, so if active chart is nothing, that means there's no active chart, then show this message box and then go to exit sub. So let's just set that all up now. We'll go back to the Visual Basic editor, and I'll take that little clause that I talked about, and I'm going to just insert it right at the very beginning of the subroutine. So if active chart is nothing, then go to exit sub. Well, what's exit sub? Exit sub is just a label that I can put at the beginning of a line, and you can use text or you can use numbers. In the old days in Fortran, you used to always have numbers at the beginning of each line of code, and you would call it statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, or more likely you would call it statement 10, statement 20, statement 30, in case you had to insert other statements in between. Then you could call it statement 12, 13, 14, and so forth. So go to exit sub, it'll skip everything, it'll go to exit sub, and the only thing after exit sub is just end. So let's see how that's going to work. I'll run my code from here. So I'll do Alt F8 is another way to get the macros list up here. If you mouse over it, you can see Alt F8. So I'm going to use Alt F8. I'm going to run export active chart again. And select the chart and try again. Oh, silly me, I didn't select the chart. Let's go back over to here, and I'll get rid of that image file so I can see if it actually creates a new one. So let's delete that file, chart to export, select the chart, it's selected, Alt F8, run the code, and also I could do step into here and it will step by step run the code, but I'm just going to run it full speed. There we go, and let's look at there's my chart again. Same chart. Now there's another thing too, is if you this kind of thing where you're working with the file system, you're saving a file somewhere, it's a little bit more problematic on a Mac, and I just don't want to get into all those details right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip the routine if the user is using a Mac. Doesn't sound fair, but that's what happens when you have a Mac. So I'm going to put that even in front of the if active chart is nothing. I'm going to paste that here. So if someone's using a Mac, it's going to go to exit sub and then just quit. The hash in front of if and end if here means it's conditionally compiled. That means if you compile, when you run the code, it compiles it so it can run it. And if Mac, that means you're running on a Mac. It's a very simple command. Then it will compile this statement in the compiled version, and it'll just, as soon as it starts, go to exit sub and it's gone. If it's not Mac, then this doesn't appear in the compiled version, which is actually what VBA is running behind the scenes, and then it just stops. So that's a little bit of user proofing that you can do. Make sure the user selects a chart before they run it so they don't get an error. If they get an error in the middle, they're going to blame you even though they forgot to select a chart. But if you tell them, oh, select a chart and try again, you're being helpful. So now what I'm going to do is break up what we have so far into two routines to add flexibility. So I'll have the first one, which is export active chart, and then I'll have another one which is export chart, and I'll tell it which chart to export. And this way I can use export chart in other routines, not only to export the active chart, but suppose I have a routine that gets some data, processes it, builds a chart, and then I want to export that chart after it's built. Then I can call export chart and it will do the exporting for me. So let's see how we do that. I'll go back over to my editor here, and what I want to do is I want to bail out after I test if export chart is nothing. So what I'm going to do here is put in an end sub, and I need an exit sub. So before that I'm going to say exit sub, and then what I need to do is this other stuff down here is going to be part of a new routine, and I'm going to call this sub, and I'm just going to call it export chart. And then I'm going to tell it what arguments I need to input, and that's going to, I'm just going to use CHT as my variable name, and I'm going to say as chart. And so now when I call this, I have to tell it which chart. So what I'm going to do is call it down up here in export active chart, and I'm going to say export chart. You don't have to type, it's not case sensitive, so I always type in lowercase. So when I hit enter at the end of the line, if it gives me the capital letters where I expect them, I know I've typed it right. So I'm going to do that this way. export chart, active chart. And you see a capitalized export chart the way I expected, and it says active chart, and that's great. And then now what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to export the active chart anymore. I'm going to export CHT, the chart that I pass into this procedure. And then I don't want active workbook path. I want the path of the workbook that contains the chart. So bear with me here. I'm going to do chart, and then I need to put a dot because I need to work up the hierarchy of the object model. So the parent of the chart is the chart object, which is the shape that includes the chart, and then the parent of that is the worksheet that contains the object that contains the chart, and then the parent of that is the workbook, and that's the object that contains the path. So this should give me exactly what I need. So now let's go back over and activate that chart. And so chart to export, the chart is active, and now I'm going to do Alt F8 and here it is. And I'm going to click Step Into because I want to step through it. So you see how this works. So you see how the process, how the execution proceeds. So I'm going to just keep hitting F8. So if active chart is nothing, it's going to skip that because active chart is something. Export chart, and it comes over to export chart. Now it's calling this other subroutine and it's passing in the chart. And I see file name is nothing yet. But what I can do is I can see the chart parent path. And so it's going to pick that up. So file name, it picked up. That's exactly right. See Excel weekend, mychart.png. The filter name the same, and it's going to export it. So first of all, let's pull up the folder. Too many windows open. That's always my problem. So I'm going to delete my chart, and we'll see that it will work just fine. I'll come back here and I'll hit F5 to run all the way to the end. And you see my chart is back. And it looks the same because I haven't changed the chart. Now what I'm going to do is refine my definition of the file name to make it more flexible as we move along. So the first thing I'm going to do is define a couple of constants, one for the default file extension, PNG, and the default file name, mychart dot. And we add the PNG after that, and we add the path in front of that. And then to refine the file name, I'm going to do it in a couple of steps. I'm going to have path name first, and I'm going to start with the path name of the workbook that contains the chart. And I oversimplified before when I said it was chart.parent.parent.parent.path. It's kind of tedious to say, but that's what it is for an embedded chart, because the embedded chart is that many layers deep in the Excel hierarchy. But if your chart is actually a chart sheet, the parent of the chart sheet is called a workbook, and you just want the path name of that. So it's just chart.oneparent.path. And so that's your path name. And then I'm going to test if there's no path name. That means the workbook hasn't been saved yet. The length of the path name is 0. Or if the path name includes a /, that means it's a OneDrive or a SharePoint path, and that gets into other complications that I don't want to deal with right now. So we're just going to use the current directory, cur_dir, which means usually it's the My Documents folder, or it's the latest folder that you've interacted with in Excel. It's the Excel's current directory. So that's fine. And then down here, I'll declare my file extension as a variable, and I'll set it equal to the default file extension. And then I construct my file name with path name and default file name and file extension. So let's switch back over to VBA, the Alt F11 key, and let's include that in here. So I'm going to first of all put the constant declarations. I'll put them at the top of the module. And it's handy to put them at the top of the module because if you want to change them, it's easier to find them here and change them in one place. Otherwise, they might be scattered throughout other code in the module, and that's just too complicated. So we're going to skip all that stuff. And so now I'm going to take all that code that I showed you before, and I'm going to paste it in, and it's going to go in right here. So now I'm going to have my path name is what I declare first, and it's a chart dot whatever parent dot path, and then my default file extension, and here's my new file name. My filter name is the same, and chart export is the same. So now let's go and try that. If you press run and there's some compile error, maybe you spelled a variable wrong or something, you'll get an error once you start running it, but you don't have to wait until you run the code to see if there's a problem. You can come up to the debug menu and do compile VBA project, and you click it, and if there's any errors, it'll show up here. You don't have to run the code. There were no errors there, so obviously I copied and pasted from my helper text file correctly, but it's always a good idea to debug it before you even test run the code. So let's pop up this, and I'm going to delete my chart. And in fact, let me show you the utility of using this. I'm going to change the chart name. I'm going to change it to my chart 1, so I don't have to keep going back and deleting to make sure it works. And so now let's go back to Excel, and we're going to go to chart to export, and I'm going to use my Alt F8, and I'm just going to run it this time. I'm not going to bother stepping into it. And it should be there as chart1.png when I open up the, here's chart1.png, and it's going to look the same as it always does. Okay, now let's add a whole bunch of nice usability to our function. Instead of just using the default file name, we're going to pop up a dialog to let the user select a path and file and a file type that they want to use. We've been using PNG all the time, all along, but there are other file formats we can use. So what we're going to use is something called get save as file name, which will show the save as dialog, and it has a few arguments. So we're going to set, I'm declaring a new variable, user file name, as a variant. I'll explain why in a second. And it's user file name equals application get save as file name. A space and an underscore just means that this command continues on the next line. So get save as file name, we have to give it an initial file name, and that's going to be the file name we just constructed with the default pieces all stuck together. We need to give it file filter, which is really a list of the different file name filter names that there are. And I'll show you that in a second. Filter index says which of the filters in the list of filters will be highlighted in the dialog. And then prompt, which is just what appears at the top of the dialog. I made user file name a variant instead of a string because a variant can contain different kinds of variables. So if the user cancels this dialog, the file name, user file name will be false, which is a Boolean. So we say if the type name of that returned variable is Boolean, then we're just going to exit the sub. We're going to go home. If though it's not a Boolean, it means it's a file name, which includes the path and the extension and everything else, and we'll put that variable value into file name. So let's go to the Visual Basic Editor, Alt F11, and see how that's going to work. And we'll put that in after we define the file name. So let me get the code that I need. This is exactly the code I just described to you. User file name as variant, and all these other things. File name is defined. It's right here. But filter names is not, filter index is not, and prompt is not. So we're going to have to add those before get save as file name. So let me give ourselves a little space in here. I usually don't leave a lot of space in my code, but it helps to make it more understandable. So you declare a variable, say what it is. Declare the next variable, say what it is. Declare a variable, have a block of code. When I'm developing code, there's a lot of space in there, and then once it's working, I get rid of all the space just so it doesn't take up so much space. And I mean, one character for a line feed is not a big deal, but it's, old habits die hard. So let's declare the filter names. And here's how the filter names have to be declared for get save as file name. you list the file, you give it a description. So the description is PNG files with the extension in parentheses and a comma and asterisk.png. And then GIF files and GIF in parentheses and a comma. JPEG files, and because JPEG has 3 different extensions it could use, you can list them all, or you could just make them only use .jpg, and if they enter something else it will not work. And then bitmap and SVG. So there's my filter names. Those are what's going to appear in a drop down where you can select what kind of filters they can use. And then now I'm going to type in some more stuff. I'm going to type in file extensions as variant, and I'm calling it a variant because I want it to include an array. And my array is just the extensions that you see here, and they're in the same order as the filter names above. And I already have defined my file extension up here. So in order to get a filter index, that's just the number 1, 2, 3 up to the number of names in the filter names variable. I'm going to use our good friend match from an Excel worksheet. Well, you can use worksheet functions like that in VBA. Preface it with worksheet function dot match, and then the arguments inside the match are just the same as they are in Excel. And so we do on error resume next before that, and on error resume go to 0 after that. Resume next means if you get an error, don't pop up an error message, just go to the next line. And then on error go to 0 means just any errors that happen, they pop up a message. But we know we're going to get an error in filter index if the file extension is not one of those in the array. We'll get in Excel, you get the #NA error. So if you get that error, filter index is 0, otherwise it's whatever the match is. So if it's PNG, it's going to be 1, GIF is going to be 2. If the filter index is 0, then we're going to default back to the default file extension, PNG, and the filter index of 1. And then we have one more thing we have to add, and that is our prompt. And your default is just going to say save as, but it might be nice to give it a little bit more information so the user can figure out what's going on. And we see prompt equals browse to a folder and enter a file name. And we're not ready to go yet, because you see here filter name, we're saying it's PNG. So if the user changes the file name or the filter name to GIF, for example, it's still going to save it as PNG, and so we don't want to do that. We need to change our definition of filter name, and for that I'm going to first we have to I'll show you when we get there. I'm just going to paste that in here. So we'll declare our filter name, and we'll get our file extension. What we need to do is find what the file extension is, and what the file extension is it's the characters that are after the last dot in the file name. We find the position of the last dot using instir_rev. That tells us the position of the last dot in the file name. Rev starts from the end. If we just use instir, that would start from the beginning. And so that tells us what character is the dot, and we want to start at the character after that, so we add 1, and we use mid, which finds text in the middle of a string starting from the position of the dot plus 1 in file name. So there's our file extension. So, and then we use something called select case, where we can say, well, if that's PNG, it's going to tell us the filter name is PNG. If it's GIF, it's GIF. If it's JPEG or JPE or JPG, we're going to say file extension is JPG. We're not going to change it in our file name, but just the program knows that it's going to be JPG. It's not going to be JPEG if that's what the user called it. And the filter name is JPG. Same for bitmap, same for SVG. And if it's some other string that's not one of these, again, we're going to default back to PNG, and we're going to actually take the file name, add a dot and PNG, and then the filter name is PNG, and now it should proceed just the same way. So let's go up here compile and make sure we got everything right. No errors, we got everything right. Let's go back to the Excel window. You can click the little Excel icon. That's like the Excel 2010 icon, believe it or not. Let's go back to Chart to Export, and now we do Alt F8, and here's what's going to happen. Export active chart. It's not just going to run and save this. It's going to run, and we're going to get this dialog. And you see, Excel Weekend 9, the path is selected here. Here's the charts that are already here, the ones that we've saved already. But and we have our file name that we told it. That's our initial file name, but that's not the one we're going to use. We're going to call it my new chart. And we could call it PNG, but let's try one of the other filters, GIF. All right. And there's no GIF files there already, but we're just going to go ahead and we're going to save it. Click. And now let's go to our folder. And the blue donut is there. We're still waiting for it, of course. There it is. There's my new chart.gif. And we pop that open, and it's a GIF file, which looks just like our chart. So that's cool. Let's watch what happens when we run our export chart routine again. I select the chart, I do Alt F8, and I click Run. Remember last time we saved the chart, we saved it as a GIF file. But now our default file type is PNG, not GIF. So if we want to save a GIF file, we have to come down here and select it again as a GIF. And that gets tedious after a while. You might have a project where, even though PNG is the preferred file format for most images like a chart, maybe your client needs GIFs for some reason, or JPEGs, or I don't know what. So you would like it to reuse the same file format as it used last time. Well, what you can do, I'm just going to quit this, and you'll see it just cancels and goes away, and nothing happens. I'm going to save the file format that we just used, so that next time when that dialog pops up, it's going to use the new file format, not the default. So I'm going to, first of all, we're going to save it in the registry. And to save it in the registry, there's a special place in the registry for settings for VBA projects like this one. So, but we don't have to know all that. We just have to know a few commands to do it. And we need their get setting and save setting. And they use what's the registry app name. And I'm going to declare a constant registry app name. I'm just going to call it Excel Weekend 9. And then a registry section, which is chart export. And then registry key, which is file extension. And the way this usually works is you might have several different registry keys to use for a certain function. So like if I wanted to save the default path, I didn't want to use the active workbook path, I could have reg key path as string, and I would put the path in that line as well. And you might have different sections if you have a larger program, and some of it is exporting and some of it is creating a certain type of chart. You would say special chart creation as that reg section, but that would be in a different module, so you could just keep it reg section, and they would all go under the same app name. So, and we have get setting and save setting. So let's just go and add that to our code. Alt F11. And so I'm going to add some constants to the top of the module. So here's our registry app name, Excel Weekend 9. Registry section is just going to be chart export, and reg key file ext is file extension. That's the name of the value that I'm going to store. And then what we do is we store that value. So the first thing we do is, before we even get going, this actually goes under file extension. So instead of this line, I'm not going to use the default file extension. I'm going to use the get setting, which will retrieve it from the registry. And so I'll put that in right here, and get setting from the app name section, registry key. And I put a default value here. In case we haven't stored it yet, it will just use the default that I say. If I've stored something there, it'll ignore the default and it'll give me back the value from the registry. So that's how I retrieve it. And then from here on, it just uses the file extension the same way as it does to construct the path name and the file index. And then at the end, when we have our file extension defined for the file that we're exporting, I'm going to insert a line right here, and I'm going to save the file extension using those same settings. The reason I'm imposing a file extension of JPG for any of these three is it will just store JPG in the registry. It won't store the specific other JPEG kind of extension. It was a little bit too complicated for me in this exercise to keep track of all of that. So if someone chooses JPEG, when it comes up in the save as dialog, it'll be JPG. So now let's see how this is going to work. Let's go back to our chart to export. And now let's go Alt F8 and we'll run it, and our dialog will pop up. And because we haven't stored anything yet for our file extension, it will be PNG, but I'm going to store it as a JPEG file. And you see it automatically says JPEG. Maybe that depends on the order of the items that I put in my filter list. So I'm just to keep it simple, I'm going to say JPG. And I'm going to save it. So it should be mychart1.jpg, and I'll save it. So here's my JPEG file that I just created, and of course it looks like the chart. It looks a little bit different. JPEGs usually look a little different, but that's the way it works. Now let's run it again, and let's see how it works. We click on macros, just mixing it up here, and I'll run. And up comes the dialog, and you see it's a JPG, so it remembered the last one I used. And so now if I save it as a bitmap, I'll save it, and I should get a bitmap appearing in this folder. There it is. So that's how we can make our users' life easier by remembering certain settings that they might want to reuse again and again. So you've seen how we started from a very simple routine, chart.export, to export a chart, and we've incrementally added additional features to make it more and more useful to the user. The next enhancement we're going to do is to include PDF as an export option instead of the usual image file formats. And so in order to do that, we need to expand our filter names, and we need to expand our array of file extensions, and then we need to add something else for doing PDF. PDF doesn't use chart.export, it uses chart.export as fixed format. It's a slightly different format, but I'll just work it right in with everything else. So let's go back to Visual Basic here, and the first thing we need to do is add to our filter names the PDF file. So I'm just going to do, I'll put a comma here, I'll space underscore enter, and I'll do ampersand, and I'll do PDF files, and I'll do .pdf here, and a comma, and asterisk .pdf again, and there's my new filter names. See how easy that was? And I add a new extension here, and now what I need to do is go down to my select case where I decide what to do for different things, where I give it a filter name. Well, there's no filter name for PDF because it doesn't use chart.export, but I have to do something else. So I'll do case and PDF, and I'll declare a new variable, a Boolean. It's a true or false. So I'll dim, and I'll give it a prefix of B for Boolean and PDF. I'm not obsessive about my prefixes, but sometimes I use them, and it's BPDF equals true. So if it's PDF, this Boolean will be true. If it's any of the others, it'll be false. So what I'll do is I'll have an if statement down below, and I'll say if BPDF, then export as a PDF, otherwise export as a regular image. And in fact, I'll do it a little bit backwards from that. So I'll still use chart export file name for a regular one if BDF is false. So if BDF is false, my if statement goes if not BPDF, then. So that means if BDF is false, then I'll do this, else I'll do something else. And I'll show you what that is in a second. Tab. One nice thing is if you type end if without a space, it puts the space in it automatically. So now what I need to do is the stuff for the PDF goes in here, and it looks like this. So first thing I'm going to do is I have to activate my chart. So again, I do a select case on the type name of the parent of the chart. If it's a chart object, I need to activate the worksheet and then select the chart area of the chart. Otherwise, if it's a chart sheet, I just need to select the chart and that's activated. So whatever's activated now is what's going to be exported using export as fixed format. And under type, we say PDF type. The file name is the same file name as before. And these other things are some of the routine things. I think these are even default settings, but I put them in here because I've just always used them that way. And now we should be able to export our chart as a PDF. So let's go back and find our chart. I have to scroll back further and further as I add sheets with routines here. So now let's come here and we're going to do Alt F8 to run it, and we'll click on run. And when the dialog pops up, we're going to select PDF. And I'm going to just give it a nice name, my PDF chart. And let's come down here to PDF. And you say it says PDF, no PDFs appear because I haven't saved any yet, and I'm going to say save. And now let's watch what happens in our folder. And there's my PDF chart.pdf, and if I double click on it, my PDF reader will open up and show me my PDF chart. And there's my PDF chart. So we've built ourselves a pretty good utility right here to export charts. What other enhancements might there be? Well, there could be other file formats we want to use, WMF or EMF, for example, which aren't available in Excel VBA, but they are available in PowerPoint. So my commercial add-in exports charts using these features, these formats, and it does it by opening PowerPoint, pasting the chart into PowerPoint first, and then exporting it from PowerPoint and then closing PowerPoint when it's done. It's a little bit tedious, but if you need that format or some other format that Excel can't do, there are ways of getting it. What we haven't done is checked whether the file name is in use. If you use chart.export, if you use the same file name, it will overwrite an existing file, and we don't want that. So we want a check that will notify the user and let them change the file name if a file with that name exists. Probably some more error handling. We did put some in there that if the user didn't activate a chart first, instead of getting an error, they would get a message. And there might be other instances where errors could crop up, and you never want a user to see a raw error message. You want it to be handled somehow, or give them a message what they should do to avoid the error. How about if you want to export more than one chart in one go? You need to do things that don't just give one default file name, but maybe give a series of file names. And so that's something that you could build in with a loop that loops and calls the export routine once for every time for every chart that you want to export. then you might want to add the command to the ribbon so it's available more easily than Alt F8, which I don't have a problem with, but you don't want to give it to users who aren't at all familiar with that. And then maybe you want to even encapsulate an add-in. Those are further enhancements which are beyond the scope of today's seminar. I'd like to just finish with a little bit about me and my company. My name is Jon Peltier. As I said, I've been an MVP for a long time. My specialties include all things Excel, but especially VBA, charting, dashboards, data analytics, things like that. My background is in science and engineering, manufacturing, statistical process control, not finance like so many other Excel experts. My company, Peltier Technical Services, Inc., was established in 2004, and I have blog tutorials and listing of my services on peltiertech.com. My services include custom programming, commercial add-ins, training, what have you. I invite you to visit my website and shoot me an email if you have questions or comments about this. Thank you.